What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of She or They with Kittens. I'm Kittens, and today I've got CYRUS VEYSSI on with me. CYRUS is an incredibly inspiring, non-binary Iranian-American content creator who, honestly, really made an impact when I discovered them. I came across his TikTok a couple years ago. It was at the top of 2020, I want to say. And before that, I hadn't seen an openly queer Iranian American with their family on top of it. His family is so beautifully accepting, and that is just not something we really see in our culture and a lot of more conservative cultures. So it honestly made me emotional when I came across their profile. So I'm super, super excited because CYRUS is just incredibly eloquent and well-spoken and so knowledgeable about just literally everything identity related and intersectional identity related and social justice related and beauty related. So we're going to get into all kinds of great stuff around being present online, mental health, how to deal with judgment, fear, bullying, insecurities, sense of self, pressure from society, all that good stuff. We're going to get into that today. And I'm just so psyched for you guys to hear what CYRUS has to say. Before we get into today's episode, make sure you like and subscribe. Leave a comment down here if there's anything in this episode that resonated with you, or if you have any questions for me or CYRUS that we can answer for you. And go find me on Instagram at I am Kittens and at she, her, they. And yeah, let's get into today's episode with CYRUS. Hi.
Hi, what's going on?
Nothing. How are you?
I'm fabulous. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah,
I'm
all the
so
way from New
excited.
York. Same.
All the way from New York.
Long overdue.
Very long overdue. Also, I was just saying to you that your makeup looks absolutely stunning. And you
Thank
are
you.
the beauty inspiration that I have. And I think you
Stop.
can now see my red lip, everyone. So hopefully it's popping as well.
Yeah, it's nice and juicy and perfect. I love it. I love it so much.
Love that.
Before we get into anything, can you go ahead and introduce yourself, name, how you
Yes, of
identify,
course.
pronouns, all that.
Of course, I am CYRUS VEYSSI. I use they, he pronouns, and I am a content creator and I worked in media for 6 years, and I'm also a brand consultant. So I essentially started in the beauty and in the skincare space, and I also talk a lot about social justice, activism for queer communities, for trans people, for non-binary folks, and I integrate that into my content through comedy. So that's my whole shtick.
I love it. I remember I first came
Thank you.
across you on TikTok. You just popped up on my For You
It
page.
joy,
Yeah.
purely I was gonna say, it literally was the first time I think I'd seen another, very very, visible non-binary Iruni who was, out there and, creating content and had this incredible career. I was I think it was probably one of the most joyous days finding you and now knowing you.
Same. Yeah, literally same. I
Yeah.
was just I think it was a video with your boba and your family, and that
Yeah,
alone, I'm already just finding
I
somebody
know.
who's queer, non-binary, gender non-conforming, just of the community, who is
Yeah.
outward, very open, and also just Persian and all the things. That alone was mind-blowing for me because the representation, just there was nothing. There was
Yeah.
nothing. Yeah, seeing your
Mhm.
family on top of it was this openly positive, supportive family I've never heard of or
Yeah,
seen or
yeah.
experienced that acceptance and warmth. So it was literally like seeing the dream, and it existed, and I was like, oh, I'm so
Okay.
overwhelmed.
You're so sweet. I feel the feeling's very mutual. I think something that I've been thinking about recently too, and we can get into this, but a whole for me, a lot of the space that I occupy online is, as I mentioned, right, creating content with my parents to reflect not only a positive relationship, but also to try and unpack this weird sort of bias, but also maybe a fallacy that not every queer person has a positive relationship with their parents, but then also trying to keep it real that my relationship with my parents is unique, right? The reality is that a lot of queer people don't have this relationship. For me, it's recently I've been thinking about how do I find that sweet spot, right? Between like creating positive representation, but also acknowledging the reality. So,
Mhm.
I mean, I think I love what I've been doing, and hopefully everybody finds joy through my videos, but it's definitely like an interesting, because it's the same thing. I mean, I don't know any other, I know very few like Iranian American or Iranians that are queer that have this sort of relationships with their parents like this.
Yeah. It's really unique and it's so beautiful and like I mean, I don't know if it was always like that with your family, if they were just like chill from the jump or if it kind of like took a minute.
Honestly, like they were pretty chill from the jump. It's so funny, y'all. Baba is like truly the sweetest, realist person. And I remember I was probably like 10 years old, and I was sitting on the couch with him, and he was like reading his Kindle. And then I
Mhm.
remember I looked over and I was like, okay, I'm gonna come out. I just want to tell him. So I remember I told him, and I said, Bob's like, I think I'm definitely queer in spectrum somewhere. And he didn't respond. And I thought he was like, in the moment, I thought he chose to not hear it, which all of a sudden
Uh,
then I started to panic and freak out. And he just looked over after a few seconds, and I think he just like smiled, and like he was like, anything else? And I was like, first of all,
yo.
acknowledge me, but second of all, but he was just so like, I'm glad you had this moment. I'm obviously like it was very interesting. And then I came out to my mom, my brother and stuff, but my
Mm,
dad, it was very interesting. I mean, we had conversations. We've definitely, I think, I'm curious to hear your perspective too. I think for me, coming out as queer was a very different experience and a learning experience than coming out as non-binary and gender non-conforming. That was
mm,
like, it took time to develop a mutual language between myself and my parents and like a lot of relatives, and it's still a work in progress versus like I think
mhm.
the queerness they just got off the bat.
Right, right. Yeah, that totally makes sense because that is at least a more like universally understood identity. Like people get
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But when it comes to gender and conversations around gender and identity, it's fairly new for like the average
Yeah.
person. So there's
Yeah.
a huge learning curve. And then once, learning the language and then being able to apply that
Yeah.
language and process what you're hearing, like that's a whole undertaking. And
Yeah.
interestingly enough, like I remember because I was actually outed when I was 15 to my dad, which was not fun.
I didn't know
Um,
that.
yeah. I was posting stuff on MySpace with my girlfriend, and I didn't
Oh.
put together that my dad would be lurking, and
Oh,
or
I
that
see.
somebody would
Oh,
send him something that I had posted. Like I thought I was in my little bubble, and I forgot that adults
yeah, of
or other
course. In a
people
safe
would see
space.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think
Yeah.
it was a thing. So he found out, which was actually kind of it took away the like fear of having to how do I tell? How do I say
Yeah.
this? Which was kind of a
Yeah.
relief, I guess, in that way. But yeah, it took a long time for him to come around. But we over the years had so many discussions, and when I was in college, I studied queer theory and feminist theory, which was like freaking over a
Mhm.
decade ago. I feel so old. But
Lord, sorry.
I had the language for a long time. So I would
Yeah.
kind of, sprinkle these little bits in, or anytime something in pop culture would come up, like Caitlyn Jenner coming out as trans, and then Caitlyn Jenner dating
Yeah.
women. So Caitlyn Jenner coming out as trans and
Yeah.
being a lesbian. Like there was a lot more
Yeah.
there. So anytime I had a chance, I would make sure to bring that up and kind of have some kind of conversation, even though my identity
Yeah.
was largely this like don't ask, don't tell space for many years with my that
Mhm.
side of the family.
Mhm.
So I was like, any
Mhm.
chance I can
Mhm.
talk about how this functions and intersections and spectrums, I was like, let's take any moment to educate and learn. So that really helped.
Yeah, I mean, I resonate with so much of that, and I think it's almost like all, but you have to be willing to learn. Like that's what I've also
Hmm.
learned, right? Like I have family who isn't willing to learn. it is what it is. I'm not gonna go beyond my share of energy and effort if you're not going to at least listen. And I think
Right.
that so much of it is everybody says it's a microcosm of age. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I mean, I have like
No.
khalas who are old, like much older, who are more willing to listen than like people my age, like cousins my age. Like
People who are
I
younger,
find it
yeah.
fascinating. Like, it's
Yeah.
weird. I mean, yeah, of course, like there's like obviously a microcosm of being younger and progressive and growing up in certain environments, but like younger people still like practice patriarchy and still
Mhm.
practice like a lot of the violent systems. It's just like
Right.
hand me downs from their parent. It's
Some people
wild.
try to make it their whole, like, they think it's funny or try to make it their personality to be like, I don't get it. Pronouns? What's that?
I
Non-binary?
know.
What's that?
Like,
And it's like, it's
shut
not cute to be
up.
ignorant. Why are you being willfully ignorant and thinking that's a personality trait? Like, that's not cute for you. It's not.
At all. I'm also just like in general, my whole thing with education, just being online, is now we're sort of in a weird place because with TikTok, there's like truly a like a trend around like this whole pronoun, like all the pronoun conversations which are getting more visibility right now, I think is
Mhm.
really fascinating. But I think what happens is that you see an experience on a social media platform and you treat it as a monolith. Like you don't
Mhm.
realize that like the
You're in a
experience is
chamber.
very unique to that completely. So it's like
Mhm.
I don't think I have to use comedy. Otherwise, I'm gonna get lumped into like, oh, I'm pushing this agenda or I'm just being like a social
Right.
justice warrior. When in reality, I I have a background in sociology. It's what I studied. It's what I'm am well versed in articulating, but you just can't do it online anymore because you're just going to be put off as like X, Y, and Z. It's
Exactly,
so
exactly.
frustrating.
It's so funny too because like I just from my industry and my background being like a DJ and in the music world, I have a lot of cis hetero dude friends
Yeah,
that are
yeah,
traditionally the ones that just like don't get it or don't know or are ignorant or have
yeah,
no reason to learn or reason to understand or reason to care. And those are the ones that I've had the most, I think, expansive conversations with because I've
yeah,
made a safe
yeah,
space for them to ask me things because
yeah.
it's so much
It's
of the time
mhm.
there's this like defensive thing that comes up where somebody wants to teach you or educate or learn and they're being aggressive about it, and nothing will turn off somebody who has a fragile ego or anything like that than feeling like they're being attacked or made to feel stupid. So using comedy
Yes.
or using a very like safe, come here, let me, share
Mhm,
this with you, let's
mhm.
talk about it, there's no wrong question, let's just discuss. That I feel like is the
Yeah.
move to educate people 1000%.
It's so fascinating you say that because I have that experience as well with like a lot of the straight white, like cisgendered men in my life that like I grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I was born and raised in a suburb of Boston. I went to a predominantly white school. I went to a predominantly white university. And a lot of like my straight white friends, men who were cisgendered men, have I've had the most engagement and desire to learn. I mean, it's interesting, even just not outside of just like gender and sexuality, but like how they practice misogyny, how they have to like unlearn certain behaviors. I have
Mm-hmm.
gay friends who are men who are like cisgendered men that practice misogyny so
Oh yeah.
violently and don't realize I mean, we know this, right? It's there's no like you can practice patriarchy no matter who you are, like regardless
Yeah.
of your gender, whatever it is. But it's just, I mean, and obviously not to say that I don't have like a lot of trans friends and queer friends that I've grown up with, a lot of Iranians specifically who sort of are willing to learn. And I feel like when I'm wrong, I like to be called out and be
Yeah.
held accountable. But I don't know, you're right. You sort of have to create, especially online. I mean, my job now, right, is like I create content, I work with brands to tell stories, but a lot of the organic content that I create is to produce more visibility around queer
Mm-hmm.
experiences. But I
Mm-hmm.
can't do that if people feel like I'm not creating a safe space for them. It's just not
Right.
going to work. It's just not going to happen. I mean, it's why I held my parents' forum. I held this forum and invited parents to come and ask stupid questions because it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I understand that you feel uncomfortable asking that in front of maybe your kid or someone you're related to that you want to learn more about. but you also do need to have a space where you can ask questions and maybe sound stupid, maybe accidentally use the wrong
Totally.
pronoun so that I can be there and navigate you, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, totally. There's just at the end of the day, there's different strategies for this. And I understand people that don't want to do the emotional labor of that because it's
Yeah,
exhausting to educate people who may be fighting back or may get
totally.
defensive. But if you
Oh, yeah.
know the best way to help somebody expand their mind and their understanding and their compassion is to just like you get
Yeah.
in where you can get in. You got to do the work somehow.
Yeah.
So like
Oh,
get in
yeah.
there. Do you think that with all of the new representation that we're having, especially just on social media with queer Iranians, because again, we haven't really
Hmm.
had representation like that before since TikTok, to be honest. Like I have no
Yeah.
reference point
No, it's a
pre-TikTok.
fact. Correct. Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
do you feel like this presence will be making a difference in more traditional Iranian communities? Or like how do you feel it will penetrate those communities and kind of adjust, if any, at all?
I think it will take our, and I'm using our very lightly because I know we have very different experiences, but I think it will take our straight cisgendered counterparts to open up the door
Mm,
to their communities to us. Like I don't know if we can like I don't know if I can penetrate those communities myself. However, the amount of times that I get messages from, like a 27-year-old straight but very open-minded Iruni who's like, I send your content to my very close-minded parents and family so that they can
mm,
see the representation out there. It really takes allyship because
right.
it's sort of like that, the situation of, a lot of the reason why I shoot content with my dad. I can talk about being respectful, respecting pronouns, respecting gender identities, etc., all day long. And have, half the population, if not more, not listen to me and not want to listen to me just by the fact that they know that my
Right.
identity is X, Y, and Z. My dad, who is a straight cisgendered man who sort of occupies this very masculine looking energy,
Hmm.
him talking about it,
They
he will
respect it.
penetrate those
Yeah.
communities and those spaces. They will respect, and unfortunately, that's the reality. Or, like, he'll be on a construction site. He works in real estate, and you'll
Hmm.
hear someone say something offensive or something problematic or something homophobic or transphobic. For me to try and interrupt and say something, I'm sure I'll get the like, well, whatever, whatever. If he's in charge and he says something, it's all of a sudden like, oh, sorry,
Right.
like, okay, like it does something very different. So to answer your question, I think it takes those allies
Hmm.
to create, to sort of like break down that barrier that we are initially um put into and placed into when
Right.
people that are not in our community find our content.
I feel like the allies are very much like Trojan horses for the cause. They're coming in there
Totally.
and just being like, I'm one of
Totally.
you guys. Don't worry about it. Nothing wrong here. And then they just like hit them with the facts in a way that they can actually understand.
Yeah. It's interesting because my senior year of college, I wrote an op-ed that was basically a big fuck you to my college because I
Mm,
had this experience of like, I'm Persian, I'm Iranian. There were very few Iranian students in my college. And I had obviously like a few friends, but the larger like Swana community at my college was very homophobic and transphobic. And
mm,
then there were a bunch of gays, like a very large population of gays at my college, but they were all white, like gay boys. And they
hmm
just fully did not recognize their own internalized racism. So my entire college experience, I fought for creating a space where we could talk about nuanced issues in a way that would like surpass stereotypes. I can't
mm,
remember, like I literally every time that I would do something, like if I was being seen as Iranian, it was Middle Eastern or Arab. If I was being seen as queer, it was like not quite in the gay, world that my counterparts were in. I just wasn't there. So I
mm.
wrote this op-ed being like, the social justice community at this college really fails people with intersectional identities because you don't even
Wow.
understand
Yeah.
what intersectionality is. It's like you don't see that my experience is very different than X, Y, and Z. And so like to me, it's also like intersectionality is a huge part of this. as an
Mm-hmm.
Iranian, I can commiserate with a lot of people right now, for example, given everything that's happening in Iran, but especially as a queer Iranian, I commiserate with the queer communities that have been fighting and are fighting for freedom, even when the majority of the people that are also fighting for freedom are not
Mm-hmm.
fighting for their freedom. It's a
Right.
very, very nuanced topic.
Right. No, it's so true. And for anyone that's watching this that doesn't know what
Yeah,
intersectionality is at all, that's just when you have multiple marginalized identity factors that are kind of stacking up and crossing over. So it's not just that you're queer and that's it. It's that you're queer and a person of color, or you have a different socioeconomic background, or, anything else that might make your life hard stacked on top of each other, basically. So
totally.
yeah, I mean, it's really, I think, across the board, and still, honestly, even in Los Angeles, I noticed this especially in the like queer women's community.
Mm,
It's
mm,
very segregated. It's very much, these
yeah,
are like white queer women's spaces, and these are like POC
yeah,
queer women's spaces, and there's
yeah,
not there's not much crossover, and there's not much understanding still, which is like, it's a work in progress, I think, across every single culture and space and society. It's definitely a work in progress, but it's so important to have that understanding that people have different experiences, and everybody should be welcomed and understood and deserves that space. So yeah,
yeah.
God,
And I
I
think
can't even
also
imagine
checking
college now.
ourselves. No, but I mean, it was also just like, I think for me, I had just started to develop a relationship with my gender in a way that I hadn't understood before, right? Like growing up, I was deeply sad because I had a lot of gender dysphoria and a lot of, like body dysphoria. And it was just like,
Mm-hmm.
I either thought you were trans or you were cis, and that there was no gender nonconforming identities that existed. I didn't know about them. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I went to college and I found out what pronouns were. And I'm someone
Yeah.
who, has very much now sort of understood that my identity is sort of somewhere in between. But
Mm-hmm.
so for me to have that experience and not really be open to it until college, and then also being a sociology major, you really do have to, I try and give people the benefit of the doubt, but also go back to what we were talking about, which is like, you have to want to learn, because if not,
Yeah.
it's not going to work.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And it's so interesting having these conversations, especially around like gender identity, because everyone has such a different experience in like finding themselves, or how they identify, or how they don't identify, or whatever it is.
Yeah,
And I'm so glad these conversations are happening, and that this language is more widely available, because even for
yeah,
me, for a long time, like, I've identified as a lesbian since like forever. But as far as gender went, I was like, I don't really have any dysphoria. I don't feel like I'm, towards the trans side of things whatsoever. I'm very comfortable in my body and how I present. But for me, more identifying more with like non-binary stuff, which I don't make that a big part of how I ID, but to me, being a lesbian, where I'm a woman, I am, my partners are women, my world has honestly nothing to do with men, and we are in a patriarchal society where everything is revolving around men, and the
hmm
definition of woman is largely tied to your interaction with men. So to not have really anything to do with men,
mm,
I was like, what is my role as a woman then? How am I operating in society as a woman if I have no connection to men? Where do I
yeah.
belong? And so that was something that I
Yeah.
was exploring a lot more, and I realized is a lot of people now, or at least like in my community, they're like, my gender is lesbian. They're like, I'm not woman or
Mhm,
man,
mhm,
or some don't even identify as non-binary. They're like, I identify as a lesbian, because that
mhm,
is really kind of
mhm.
its own little pocket that exists in this world.
Fascinating, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's really different.
I'm not as I'm admittedly not close to this very, very fascinating nuance. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's so interesting and so real, and I think what you said about how, like, if I'm not taught, like, womanhood and it being historically tied to manhood and these arbitrary like categories that we've created. It's so wild. That's such a
Mm-hmm.
so fascinating to me and really, really interesting.
Yeah. I
I
feel
haven't
like that.
thought about it that like truly. You're like opening my like I yeah, I mean I think also don't mind my jug of water. I feel like it's been yep. I feel like for me it's also I don't really have the experience of holistic queerness when it comes to social settings because so many social spaces are intended and created for men in queer
Mm-hmm.
spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Even in queer spaces, I mean, there's two lesbian bars in New York or three lesbian bars in New York
We have zero
still to
here.
this
We have
day. Like, there's
zero in
not
Los Angeles. Zero.
like we don't. I don't think. I think. Yeah, it's very hard to even outside of sort of like heteronormativity to still not tie the existence and like the purpose of womanhood as tied to men. Like it still happens in those spaces a lot
Yeah.
and very
Or even
frequently.
even now with like the way or the definition of lesbian um and some other gender related identity terms. Now, it used to be
Hmm.
like lesbians are like women who love women, but it's now kind of changed because there's so many non-binary lesbians and there's so many
Yeah,
um, trans lesbians, and they wanted to make it a bit more inclusive. So now the terminology, which I personally don't like, and I feel like we need to figure out a different definition still, is non-men who are attracted to non-men. And I'm like, why are we still
interesting.
centering men in the
You're still
definition of
centering that. Yeah,
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 it's
it's
really odd
interesting.
to me.
Yeah,
It's really odd. So we're lacking in language, but it's I mean that shows that everything around this is a work in
everything surround.
progress.
Yeah,
Everything is
yeah,
a work in
it
progress when it
really
comes to
is.
language and evolving these understandings and educating each other even within those very tight, nuanced communities. We're all still learning, we're all evolving, and we're all changing. We're all trying to figure out the best way to respect each other's identities and express ourselves. And it's a process.
I have a question. I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like, and this might sound controversial, but I think about it all the time. In a professional setting, from a from in your world as a DJ, as a content creator, and as a creative artist, do you find that there's an advantage to leaning into the non-binary identity that you hold, or disadvantage when it comes to working with brands? So I'm making this up, but like if a brand reaches out, does it do you think it helps to lean into a certain direction of your identity? To give you an example, for me, I find that brands still consider me to be just a queer man and not a non-binary
Mm.
creative if
Mm-hmm.
I don't look femme, which is like there's so much to unpack there,
Right,
but like I
right.
find it interesting. So for me, it's also like sometimes it can be a disadvantage for
Mm.
me to, I guess, like occupy the world as a non-binary person from a professional standpoint too, and not be like categorized just as a queer
Right,
man.
right. I mean, for me, I don't think there's really an advantage or a disadvantage because people more so
Hmm.
focus on the fact that I'm, perceived as a woman in society, a femme woman.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah,
kind of the main thing because, at least on the music side of things, it's everything's still wildly dominated by cis hetero men. And
yeah,
when there are women or queer people of any sort, or people who present as feminine in any way, they're kind of lumped together. And
yeah.
there's not really conversations um around gender identity in that way as much. So it's not really as
Mm,
much of a thing. It's more something that comes up, at least for me, when I'm having if I'm doing a brand partnership, or there's an article being written, or there's a press release for, like, I'm putting music out, whatever. And we have to make sure they, like, mix up the pronouns. I'm like, can we please, it's she, they, babes. Like, can we just
Yeah.
sprinkle some in there,
Yeah.
please?
Yeah.
Just like, please, just a couple. Thank you.
Yep. Yep.
And it seems so small. It seems so
Literally.
small, but
I know.
it does make a difference. But I
Yeah.
think, at least for me, like I still definitely have a massive privilege, at least when it comes to working with brands or being public facing, because I still occupy the space of like feminine woman in everybody's
Yeah.
minds, essentially, unless they like care to get to know me. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. It's definitely, I think, something that's more of a um issue or obstacle for people who are more perceived as men in the eyes of like mainstream society.
Yeah.
And if they are doing anything that is queer in any way, whether that is like who they love or how they present or anything like that, the issues are more there. Because yeah, I feel like
Yeah.
people just haven't adjusted their brains
So
yet.
interesting.
Yeah.
No, or like I don't know, like that, like this amount of facial hair that I have on my face, people
Hmm.
will see it and be like, "I thought you were non-binary," and I'm just like,
Yeah. Oh
it's
my God.
fascinating because it's like, because I'm just like, but it's made me insecure. I mean, especially working in beauty,
Mm.
sometimes I also don't want to go to an event and not have a completely like
Clean
clean
shave.
shaven face, and I realize that I'm like subscribing to like tropes of
Expectations.
femininity,
Yeah.
expectations to like be be a certain type of non-binary, like the
Hmm.
feminine pretty version. And then I'm just like, will I get hired again? Will they want to work with me if they don't perceive me or see me as beautiful? Like, will they like question my, I don't know. There's so much
Mm.
that I still am working through, or like it's just second nature now. Like I have like a shaving schedule if I know that I'm going out, or like New York Fashion Week. I feel like people won't take me seriously if I have like, even this amount of like facial hair. And that is a bias that I need to unpack, but I think it's
Hmm.
also a very real experience because I've seen it happen to other creators where like they don't quite occupy the version of non-binary or gender non-conforming that that person has in their head. And then you have to be like, okay, well, the
Hmm.
version of it that you have in your head is not the true version of what the identity means, but you're in a position of power. So what am I supposed to do?
Right. God, I have to send you this book, and I'm forgetting the full title of it, but it's based on Middle Eastern related stuff and gender, and it's called like something and something, and like women with beards, and like
Oh,
some.
yeah. I think
I
is it
forget.
Afsan and Najmani? Yeah, it's
Yeah, yeah, I'm forgetting. I don't
women
know if you've
with
read, or women
um,
with mustaches, or like something.
women with mustaches and men without beards. Men without beards and
Yes,
women with mustaches, or
yeah,
something
something
like
like
that.
that,
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah, I feel like this kind of touches on that, but yeah,
Well,
I mean,
it's
I can't even imagine the pressure. And this was actually something I was going to ask you, being like, how do you feel like being more public facing, because you've had a background working in the corporate world, which I know that comes with a whole other slew of issues, but
mm,
becoming a creator and being more public facing, especially working with beauty brands and like in the fashion world of things, how do you feel like that's affected your sense of self?
mm. I feel like for me as a queer person and as a non-binary person, I need like 30 years to figure out who I am. I
Hmm.
need many years, right? I started at 20 years old. I start like the version of me at 20. I'm 8 years old right now, right?
Hmm.
Like I think about it that way. I have so many years of growth that I need to go through, of maturing that I need to do now in the identity that works for me. But I always say that I started my life when I was 18 in terms of
Hmm.
19, right? Becoming public facing in the middle of all of this can be very detrimental to not only mental health, but also to your identity in the sense that you're not finished.
Right.
So then you have all these different people and places telling you things and who you are and hiring you because of this. And it's sort of like you lose the track that you were on. right? If
Mm-hmm.
I'm using this analogy, it's very silly and it's very crass. If I'm 8 years old, right? And I'm getting it in the sense that like I have had 8 years or 9 years of experience in my identity. That's nothing. I mean, it takes people lifetimes to really understand who they are. Being public facing now has just made it more difficult for me to not lose my sense of self and to
Mm.
not lose the trajectory that I'm going in. I mean, like, even, like being at New York Fashion Week parties and events, I'm the only non-binary person that gets invited to many of these events, to many of
Yeah.
these top events. It's all these, like fashion girlies, and I'm not a fashion girly myself, but it's
Mm.
a lot of like, straight white women,
Yeah.
some of whom do not take me seriously, and that's fine because they don't know the trajectory that I'm going towards, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't know that I'm going to be the next big thing. But
They
like, no,
don't
I
know.
mean, like, truly, like, the way that I think about it is that like I I think part of it is dealing with your people do not, even where I'm at right now, which is, public facing. I have a platform.
Mm-hmm.
I do not get taken seriously. I do not get taken seriously. And even having it had corporate past, I have to fight to prove that I have that knowledge all the time. So I think part of it is the struggle and the frustration of still, and I hear this from friends of mine, from folks who are A-list celebrities. You can be one of the most prolific people in media, and you still won't be taken seriously if you have a
Yeah.
certain marginalized identity or some sort of perception that's non-normative. So
Mm-hmm.
I experienced that, my version of it, in a much smaller scale. But the positive side of it
Mm.
is I'm finally making some noise. I mean, I'm finally, yeah, all of those sort of visions I had when I was younger of like, oh my God, I want to connect with more queer Iranians. I want to work with these dream brands of mine. It is happening. I mean, those things bring me a lot of joy, and it's just a constant battle of being in the moment for me because I told myself when I reached X level, I'd be fine, like I'd be good, and
Yeah.
then it's like you just want more. We've talked about this. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
like
It's like
it's
the
not.
the finish line keeps moving forever and ever and
It
ever.
keeps moving, and it's like,
Yeah.
what's enough? And then you realize, and then now there's like a whole slew of, I never used to do the influencer circuit of like the events, and now I understand like the drama and the weird like energy, and I still want to be grounded in reality. I want to be grounded in something that's like very real and very
Mm-hmm.
non fantasy in a sense, because it that fantasy can get very dark. Fantasy can turn into a nightmare very quickly, just
Yeah.
depending on the night.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think this is really important stuff for a few reasons. Number one, I think a lot of people on the outside who maybe don't have a public facing um, uh, life or job or anything, they just have a nice, normal, quiet life where they just have, their day job or
Hmm.
whatever. There's or
Hmm.
somebody who's young and growing up and is, following all their favorites online. There's this idea that once I have this, I will be happy, or this person looks like
Yeah.
they've got it all together, and like if I could just get there, then my life would be easier. And I think, I even have this where people are like, I had a fight with somebody recently, but they were like, your professional life is so
Mm.
obscenely easy, as if like I have no struggles because I'm not working, a 40-hour work week in a certain way. And I'm like, honey, the spirals that I go through every
Also,
day, the
and
spirals.
also I say this a lot. It's like this being in like working in social media. You're not working an 8 hour day. It's true. You're working like a 15-hour day in a sense, because you're always on. You're always like, if I
Always.
have to, there's we can have a conversation about this whole, it went viral on TikTok of like, it's try being an influencer, it's so hard, all these things. We can have that conversation, but we can also have a conversation around like, and I say this, anybody who wants to do social media, it's you're cut for it or you're not. Like, you're either,
Mm,
and if you are, okay. The level of, I think, the mental, it's just everything's out on the table. I mean, it's like we sign up for it, but part of it is we don't. I don't
Mm-hmm.
sign up to get people to send me hundreds of like death threats a day. I didn't sign up
Yeah.
for that. I signed up to be public facing, but I didn't like everybody's like, well, what do you expect? And I'm like, I don't expect people to send me death
There's
threats.
such a
I don't
dehumanizing
expect that.
aspect
I
to
don't
that.
expect that. Yeah. So for that, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it's just like
No,
this,
no.
it's comical to me that people would assume that there isn't this very, very different. And also, if you're not in it, you don't know.
Yeah.
If you're not in it, you just don't get it. You just won't get it. It really
Yeah.
is like you have to experience it to understand it.
I think that it's really dangerous when people look up to their favorite, influencer or celebrity or creator or anyone who's just present online and think that
Yeah.
it's just easy. And they don't remember that we're 9 times out of 10 presenting the good parts and the curated parts, and that we're likely spiraling and dealing with some other shit behind the scenes. And
Yeah.
I think that's really important to like hammer home for people that it's no matter how big you get, like literally the biggest celebrities and most like, Grammy award winning, fucking massive lifetime, whatever people that I know are still going through the same,
I know.
self-worth questioning and insecurities and anxiety and fear of failure and fear of not being
Hmm.
accepted and fear of losing relevance, like all these things that never goes away. And I think it's something that's so important to figure out how to manage, no matter how old you are, no matter where you work or what position you have, or if you are public facing or not, or massive or not. It's it's
Yeah.
really, really important for people to know that.
For me, I'm learning about when to like not not always be on. And like I'm not the type of person that like will want to get on camera and like cry. I think I've like cried once or twice like
Mm.
publicly just to like again
Show
feel
you're
some
human.
sort of a connection with us. Yeah, like just be like this is like a very real experience for me and like this is obviously happening, but I think what happens, and this is a whole nother conversation, but like if you become too vulnerable then you start to like quantify that and you sort of gate like your what's my engagement on this. It's just like it gets to a very
Yeah.
dark place for me at least.
Yeah.
So but I try and be like sometimes like when I go home, obviously I film a lot of content with my parents, I'll catch myself wanting to film or refilm an interaction and then stopping and being like, you don't need to film this. Like you don't like
Yeah.
this. No one needs to see this right now. Like
This can just be
it
yours.
keeps this can just be mine. This can
Yeah.
just be mine right now. And my boyfriend's helped me a lot with like I'll just be endlessly scrolling and he'll just be like,
Enough.
"You're done. You're
Yeah.
good. You've seen it all. Like it's okay."
Yeah.
Um, in the moments that like I don't
Hmm.
need to further fall into this world of social media. It's like I almost wish I had like a wrangler who could, right now it's a combination of Michael and my
Yeah.
parents who help me sometimes, but
Yeah.
it's a lot. It's very overwhelming.
But actually, that's another thing
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you about. You are like the master of the graceful clapback. Like you get
Oh, the art
heinous.
of clapping back.
Yeah, you really like you get really disgusting, hateful comments that are just
Mhm.
horrifying,
Mhm.
honestly. And I'm
Mhm.
sure you get even
Mhm.
more than like I pass by. So
Yeah.
some people take the angle of just, ripping the person to shreds like Drew does, which I
Yes.
love that. That's,
Yes.
fun
Yeah.
and amazing.
Yeah.
And other people will
Yeah.
just, be really upset and shook by it and, send people after
Yep.
whatever. But you do it in a very graceful and witty way that I think
Mm.
is so
Mhm.
interesting. And it's really like,
Mm.
comedic and powerful. And I
Mhm.
love that. So what made you take that angle? Like what
Yeah.
inspired you to go at it that way?
I For sure, without a doubt, I owe a lot of that articulation to Alok, who
Mm-hmm.
is If you
Amazing.
don't know, they're a poet, comedian, writer, author, incredible human, someone who I look up to. And I just used to get so angry when people would say things. And then I was like, I don't want to give them the time of day, but I also don't
Mm,
want to let it go. I feel like I'm back in third grade when I like couldn't say anything to like the bullies, and then I felt so bad because I couldn't stick up for myself. And now that I have a platform, I think to myself, okay, if you're going to say this, I'm sure you'll feel comfortable if I, show it to 100, 200, 300,000 people. Like I'm sure you're comfortable, right?
mhm,
And then I think so Alok, for me, Alok has always found grace and empathy in also the sort of in their world when people
mhm,
have said horrible and nasty things to them as well. So I sort of I took time to like try and create a version of it for myself.
mhm,
They give so much empathy and love, and for me it's more of like a combination, because
mhm,
it's something that I always say is everyone who comments something negative on my page is trying to like find my trauma, and I always say
mhm.
you're just revealing your own. Like it's not for me,
Yeah.
because it's not once you're in a place in your life where you're comfortable, and thank goodness that I have my days and it's hard, but
We all
I'm
do.
I'm
Mm,
light years ahead of where I used to be. You could tell me that this is a piece of bread,
mhm.
and I would say it's a bottle of water. You can tell me that I'm X, Y, and Z. I don't see that. That's not
Yeah.
my problem. That's you. It's not like that's the thing is people always it's there's this I think it's a quote, and I'm not going to misquote it, but it's
Mm,
you cannot hurt me without my permission. And I think that's
mm,
really hard to do. But basically what I try and do is, and I do this I seldomly now, but I'll take a comment and I'll sort of like look into this person, see who they are, and deem if they're worthy of being on the chopping block.
uh-huh.
I do not, and something that Alok does, which I again shout out to them for doing this, is they sort of block out the name of the person or the username.
Mm,
I don't do that.
no.
I think that that's my form of accountability. I'll be graceful and courteous and give you empathy, but I won't give you anonymity.
Yeah.
I'll like
If you're not gonna be anonymous and you're
that's
coming
not
out
to me.
here being that open
No,
with your hateful words, like, why am I gonna
sure,
protect you?
yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that way of saying it. Yeah. So I think, the reason why I do it is, to me, it's also like a form of my own therapy and forgiveness. It's like
Mm,
each time I write something and I post it like that, I can just imagine the younger version of me just like feeling so proud, and being
yeah.
like, when I didn't have the language to articulate a
Mm,
response, I do
mhm,
now. And so a lot of the
mhm.
times when I post these things, people will comment or they'll message me like, hey, like, this is incredible. Like, don't give them the time of day. Like, they're not worth it. And I appreciate that. I know they're not worth it. It's not about them.
Yeah.
It's about me finally having a voice,
Mm,
um and offering accountability in a sense to this world, because to your point, there's amazing people like Drew who will eviscerate people,
mhm.
and that's a strong form of accountability. And if what I can do is also a strong form of accountability, in a way that works for me, then I'm all for it. So I try not to do it as often now, but and also the funny thing is people are like, don't. I'm like, girl, if you knew how many, I get hundreds of these a day.
Yeah.
If I gave all of them attention, I
That would be
wouldn't
your
even
whole platform.
sleep.
Yeah.
Right, it'd be my whole platform. So again, I try and find a balance, but I genuinely now, I think for a while it was sort of fake it till you make it. I'm so I don't I think if you are well adjusted and you're comfortable and secure in who you are, you have no reason to be hurtful and mean to somebody else. I've had to check myself over the past few years when I've wanted to like like, so, on TikTok, there's like sometimes when people make videos that like stitch another person or like make
Yeah.
fun of something, like there's no reason to do it. It really isn't. Like it's just not, especially when it's something that like you cannot, you don't have agency over. That
Yeah.
is like a whole different playing field for me.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you said about if younger you saw you doing this, you're doing this because you didn't have the voice when you were younger.
Yeah,
I feel like has to be so healing to be able to do that. And it's such a
yeah,
good thing to
yeah.
keep in
It
mind, I
is.
think, for everyone when we're having a hard time with something. to think
Mhm.
about what we would do for our younger self, like what our younger self wish
Mhm.
they could have done in a moment when we're feeling
Mhm.
insecure or
Mhm.
unsafe or bullied or not good
Yeah.
enough or whatever. Like if you were little, what would you want your big brother or sister sibling to
Mhm.
do in that
Mhm.
moment for you and do
Mhm.
it for yourself now?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. A
yeah.
100%. I think anybody's entitled to respond however they want. Like, to your point, like,
Hmm.
there's many different ways that people respond. This is what works for me right now.
Yeah.
And I think people forget that I was a writer. Like, I think if I was to teach a course, it would be the art of clapping back. I think for me, masterfully writing off someone in a way that sort of connects and merges a little bit of humor with empathy, with a little bit of cheekiness, with a little bit of shade. Like, I think that's my sweet spot
Yeah, it's such a
for
good
sure.
balance that you have, and like nobody else does
I
that.
mean, here's the thing though. I can be ruthless on TikTok. On
Mm.
Instagram, I'm much more courteous. On TikTok,
Mhm.
I can be more ruthless. I mean, I definitely people are gonna see sometimes my comments are just like very trolly, but
Mhm.
like whatever, I'm entitled to that too.
Yeah, yeah. You're allowed to have fun. You're allowed to have fun out there.
Yes, for
Ugh.
sure, for sure.
Okay, I want to get into just a quick bit about what's going on in
Yeah,
Iran right now, and I
yeah,
think right now, obviously, everything that's happening in Iran is like incredible and crazy and just long overdue. But being
yeah,
here as somebody who's grown up in the US, has Iranian family, is very connected to the culture, but not directly there and not having had to experience a lot of the oppression. I feel like we've talked
yeah,
about this. There's there's a lot of dissonance and there's a lot of like guilt and privilege and connection and just there's so many complex feelings all at once. And I think that makes it hard to figure out where you belong in this moment in time. How can you help? How much do you speak? How are you supposed to feel? How are you supposed
Oh,
to
you
act?
and
Like
I,
there I mean,
yeah,
I still daily it's like, why haven't you posted about Iran today? And then it's, why haven't you posted more
you
about
and I have
Syria and
gone
Turkey?
through.
Because
Yeah,
are you just
I know,
you only care about one thing? And it's like,
I know.
bro, come on. So
It
what
is.
what would you what kind of advice would you give? Because I think this is something that not only us as Iranian Americans, like not only us in this moment in time are dealing with this, but there's so many things that always happen in different countries, different tragedies, and people who are ethnically tied to those countries that aren't there, whatever. And I think there's got to be a lot of struggles around how to navigate and deal.
Yeah.
So what kind of tips would you give to somebody
It's
like that?
hard, right? I mean, I try and think about because I'm also, I mean, I've said this a bunch of times. I think sometimes people mistake my platform for being an activist page, and I'm not. I just have
Mhm.
intersectional identity. So the fact that you just assume that to be an activist is like also problematic. I have a
Mhm.
lot of friends who do grassroots activism that dedicate their entire platform and their life to activism. I would not give myself that title because I think it would be disrespectful to people who are actually true activists. I can advocate for certain issues, but the advice that I get from them is sort of the advice that I pass on to other people. It in sort of large scale movements, in revolutions, in any sort of like political dissidence where it's like there's conflict and violence, you need to pace your movement in order to not burn out. And I think that's
Mm.
the thing, is we were all burning out. Like, I was posting every day,
Yep.
multiple times a day. I was losing, like, people who had been on my platform for what my platform is, which is part of it is my business and my job, which is to talk about beauty and lifestyle. Obviously, like, I think it's important for people to use their platform, and they should. And
Mhm.
I was really, really, really sad to see a lot of my friends not post anything about Iran, not once. But I also would be like, I mean, you and I talked about this. I'd get messages all the time. And it's sort of like you're equating how much I care about Iran, whether or not I post it today. Maybe I was really fucking sad today and I
Yeah.
didn't post anything because I was just sad. Maybe I'm saving my energy. Maybe I'm doing things behind the scenes that
Mhm.
you have no clue. Like, I think the frustrating thing too is like for example, with the devastating earthquake in Turkey and Syria, and how horrible it is. I've been doing most of the stuff that I do is behind the scenes. I've been donating. I've been like reaching out to my friends who are setting up GoFundMe. I'm not doing a lot of I mean, I've posted links and all that, but I've
Yeah.
gotten messages from people and I'm like, I wish you knew what I was doing behind the scenes, but that's none of
Mm-hmm.
your business. And
Yeah.
immediately the response, oh, well, yeah, like, and I'm just like, you're just saying things to say
Why?
things. Like, stop. You're being
Yeah.
really, really obnoxious. Yeah, and also, like, I think part of it is right now in Iran, you have, oh my God, it's so complicated, right? You have the diaspora community of Iranians. You have Iranians that there's this sort of the ethno-religious and ethno-region conflicts, right? You have I made this video with my brother, and it was like a fun like TikTok where basically like it was a lot of white people growing up didn't even know what Iran was, or like
Yeah.
that Iran was different than like bordering countries. and
Yeah.
and I made this video responding to like this white person being like, oh, like, so you eat hummus and you speak Arabic, the assumption that we're all the same.
Yeah.
It got, I mean, granted, I think that it's definitely like I think for me there's so much context that gets lost in
Mm.
people thinking that like I didn't know that there are Iranian Arabs, that there are many languages that are spoken in Iran, that but it
Yeah.
wasn't about like, to me it was like taken out of context, and that
Mm-hmm.
really hurt me because I got comments and it was only from like 6 or 7 people, but to me, I'm very sensitive. I'm a Gemini, and like I freaked
Mm.
out, right? Like I was like, my God, they think that I'm like I, I don't know, everything phobic, and that
Oh my
but it was
God.
just it was frustrating too, because for me it was in that moment it was like, okay, well, Sears, learn, like, what can you like learn? And it was in that moment it was just like, but it was just taken out of context in a way that really sucked. And then I reached out to the person who like reposted it and was like, this person hates Arabs, like they're so racist. And I was like, hi, you don't know me, you don't follow me. Do you want to have a conversation? Because this is like really obnoxious what you're doing. And they immediately like doubled down, and then they were like, oh, well, and I was like, yeah, like, you don't come after me unless you're willing to have a conversation, unless you're willing to also point out what's really happening. If
Mm-hmm.
I right now feel like something happens where I need to be held accountable, I will take the time to like hold myself accountable. But with what happens in Iran, it's so complicated, it's so nuanced, people are really emotional. My biggest piece of advice to anyone is the real people will always be with you and will always stand by you. I say this
Mm.
all the time. For the 6 or 7 people who really tried to like ruin my day, I have hundreds of people that reach out to me just thanking me for like all that I'm doing and for even
Mm-hmm.
posting, which is the least that I can do. So my
Yeah.
advice is, one, pace yourself. Burnout is very real. This is a long revolution. Iran will be free, and it's going to take a lot of time. And two, everybody has a different agenda, and some people unfortunately have like really obnoxious agendas that are targeted towards bringing other people down just for the sake of bringing them down and making a point about a certain discourse. And it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm the victim of that, I am. I'm sure I will be in the future, but just watch out for that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's very, very important. Very important advice. Favorite parts about Iranian culture that you love?
Selfishly, our food is the best food in the
It really
world.
is.
I think that it really is like, and the funny thing is anybody who has Persian food
Yep.
loves it, like loves it. I have so many like American friends who've tried, gone to like Iranian restaurants. They love the food. I think our food is,
Superior.
I mean, it's selfishly me. I think I think we have such a gracious culture. This sort of whole energy around Taruf of wanting other people to have an experience of, our having positive relationships with family members who want to see us, really thrive is a wonderful thing. And I also find our history to be
Mm.
fascinating, our writing, our poetry, our historical figures to be so prolific in shaping who we are today. So I think that combination, that orchestra of culture to me is like what makes me the most proud to be
Mm. I
Iranian.
love that orchestra of culture. That's such a good one. Favorite Persian
Mm,
dish?
thank you. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
tie between tagine with chicken, like chicken
Yep.
in the tagine that my mom makes, or I really love just like kebab kubide with rice and mastokiyar, like that
Yeah.
as a dish. But also, like, my mom makes a really good fesenjoon.
Ooh.
So I have to say, like, traditional dish, her fesenjoon is phenomenal. And it's hard to make a
Yeah,
fesenjoon,
I
I
haven't
think.
had pheasantjoon in a
It's
while.
really hard to
God,
make a good fesenjoon.
so good. I made
Oh, yeah. I'll make some for you. Well, I'll have to make
please.
it for you.
I made my first horma sabzi like from scratch the other like I don't know 2 weeks ago
Oh,
with my dad.
I love a good gourmet sabzi too.
That is.
Okay.
I was in the kitchen all day. Like,
I know.
oh my
I know. It
God.
is. Yeah.
It's not
It's
a
not a.
joke. It is not a joke. And my
No,
house smelled like it
no,
for
it's no
weeks,
joke.
which is not
No.
bad. But 3
Okay.
desert island beauty products. That's skincare and makeup.
Shiseido S. Okay, my Shiseido SPF stick, because I'm on a
Mm-hmm.
desert island, so it's probably hot
Mm-hmm.
and sunny. Um, I would definitely bring with me my Maybelline Lifter Gloss, which is the glossiest and most amazing lip gloss, just so that I could be like moisturized and
Mm-hmm.
hydrated. And then I think for the last product, I would bring my Olaplex leave-in conditioner so that I could actually like keep the
Right.
curls, keep the curls
Right.
going. So I got you hair, skin, and a
Very
little
nice.
beauty.
Solid. Um,
Those would
those
be
are good
mine.
ones. Those are very important. God, I need to do a leave in. My hair is so dry. And then dream creative space. So this is anywhere in no
Mm.
rules. Literally, it could be on the moon, under the water, like whatever you want to do. What would be your most magical space to just write or read or be creative and just kind of like be with yourself and your thoughts?
I love that. If New York City had a little island that then was like in and of itself like a tree house, like
Ooh,
a really like comfortable, cozy cabin. Because the thing is I love cabins, but I don't like being too far.
right.
So imagine a metropolitan city with like a mile in the middle of just a secluded, chic cabin.
Mm,
To me, that I love. As long as I know I'm close by to a city, if I can see the
hmm.
city, but that's the environment that I love. So
No,
it's
it's a good
weird, but
balance.
that to me is like my favorite. That's my favorite creative
So like warm,
space to be
cozy
in.
treehouse cabin that's in the city but not.
Warm, cozy cabin, but in the city, but not.
I love
Exactly.
that.
Yeah. So I can still hear honking and I can hear, not the nature. I'm not
No.
a nature gal. I want to hear the city, but I want to be in that, but I want to be in that
Got it.
environment.
Oh, that's such a good one. I
What's
love
best
this.
both
Literally,
worlds.
everyone has the most
Thank
interesting,
you.
different answers, and it's my favorite to hear every time. I love it. Ugh.
This is a great, you have the
Oh,
best
thank
prompts.
you. Um, well, that's kind of all I've got for you. Do you have any final thoughts, advice for anyone who's
Amazing.
trying to find themselves, empower themselves?
You can, yes, listen, you are the day when the day ends, there's a new one coming up. Like I always think about like you don't have to win a gold medal every
Mm.
day. Something my dad told me. You don't have to win a gold medal every day. You can just have a normal day. You can have a sad day. You do not need to win a gold medal every day. And start to speak to yourself the way that like you would speak to your best
Mm.
friends when they're down, or the advice that you would give them. Continue to practice that. It's really hard. I have trouble doing it. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat and everywhere, just at CYRUS VEYSSI. And my DMs are always open.
Yay.
It's true. I respond to all my DMs. I respond to every
Oh, wow.
DM that I get, unless it's a bot or unless it's like a troll. So you know where to find me.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. This was wonderful. I appreciate you so, so much.
Oh, thank you for
Ugh,
having me. I
yes,
appreciate
I'll talk to
you.
you
This was so fun. Thank you
soon.
for having
Thank
me.
you. Bye.
Okay.